All right. So, what we're going to be able to do today is go over our information about the integumentary system. It's not a lot of information, but it's good information. A lot of good things that we'll see here. So, one of the big things that we'll notice when we're looking at this particular uh, model, we're seeing that there's actually going to be multiple layers. So there's different layers to this um, particular the skin. So with the different layers, I just want to make sure that this pen is working. We're going to see that there's this epidermis right here. So the epidermis, when you see this word epi, you're thinking outermost. So we have the epidermis, which is the outermost. Dermis, whenever you hear the word dermis, you think kind of skin with this, right? So this is like the major portion of the skin. So we can write that word major next to it. When we look at all of the different types of structures, they're going to pretty much be found in the dermis. And then we have the hypodermis, which hypo, if you remember, is going to be below. So if I have the hypodermis below, dermis in the middle, and epidermis, those are our layers. Now, technically, the hypodermis is not part of what we call our skin. It's a layer below the skin. Okay. It's also known as subcutaneous, sub meaning below, cutaneous meaning skin. So this area is subcutaneous below the skin. So the big things that we're going to kind of focus in on are going to be these guys right here, the epidermis and the dermis. Now, what we'll see is as we go through, the dermis is actually broken down into a couple of different layers, papillary and reticular. We'll talk about each one. The epidermis is actually made up of multiple layers as well. So each of these are going to be layers of skin. And you'll see that the different types of structures, whether they're nervous structures or appendages or different types of glands, uh, all of this is going to be mostly found in this dermal area, in this dermis. So we start off definition wise. When we say the integumentary system or the integument, sometimes you'll just see it as the integument. That's the skin and basically all of its derivatives. What does that mean? Sweat, oil glands, hair, nails, everything that kind of makes the skin the skin. And this whole system is essentially working together. Each of those derivatives are actually going to be considered parts of the different types of organs for each of these. So when you're seeing this, the skin is a large organ. And so if it's an organ, it's made up of tissues, and tissues made up of cells, and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of the job for our skin is protective. It's not the only job, but it's a lot of the job. And we're going to see that each one of these particular structures that we're going to have is essentially going to go and try to help with this protection. Now, with the skin having two parts, we have the epidermis and the dermis, like I was saying before. The subcutaneous tissue, sub means below, cutaneous, think like skin. So this layer is below the skin. So it's deep to the skin, meaning it is going to have some of the same properties, but it's not part of the skin. Okay. This subcutaneous layer is known as the hypodermis, hypo below. So the epidermis is actually made up of epithelial cells. And this is A lot of the times, what you're going to see this, you're going to think stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Uh, when you're when we were reading about the tissues and we're reading about squamous cells, we know that they're thin, flat cells. So thinking stratified squamous is a bunch of layers of these flat cells, thinking like the best way for us to actually kind of get this protection is having multiple layers of these flat cells. The dermis makes up the bulk of the skin, right? It's going to be composed of fibrous connective tissue. A lot of it, I want you to, uh, in this case, we're going to think areolar connective tissue. When we see this, it's not going to be the only connective tissue. I'm just saying that you can think of that because one of the things that we'll notice about areolar connective tissue, if we were doing something, just thinking about like almost like definition wise, it's a strong, flexible glue and it's located underneath the skin. So that's going to be really, really super important. In the epidermis, we're going to have different types of cells. Every time you see this word site, you should be thinking cell. So melanocyte, keratinocyte. Dendritic cells and tactile cells, obviously, they have the word cell there, going to be used for different things. The major cell that we're going to see is the keratinocyte. That's like number one. These other ones are going to kind of be used throughout. The keratinocyte is going to be kind of where we're seeing this keratin come into play. Keratin, if you were looking at stratified squamous epithelial tissue, there's keratinized and unkeratinized. If keratin is present, which is kind of a fibrous protein that's found inside that cell, what it does is it kind of kills off the cell. So when it kills off the cell, a keratinocyte that is quote unquote dead, right? Like dead skin cells, is just essentially, especially for our skin wise, is essentially just going to be filled with this keratin. Melanocytes are where melanin comes into play. Melanin is going to be what gives the skin its color of like a brown kind of color. Langerhans cells, this is, you're going to think like immunity here. What ends up happening is this is like a big white blood cell that when um, some sort of foreign entity or foreign particle or body is present, this is going to eat it. And this one, we're thinking sensory for our Merkel cells. So just as I always do, I'm going to go over every single one of these cells. So in our epidermis, we are going to have layers. So let's go over the layers first and talk about then the different types of cells that we're going to see throughout these layers. So Langerhans cells, see that guy right here? It's going to be essentially a white blood cell that's stuck in the area. It's looking for the immunity. These Merkel and tactile cells and the sensory neuron, this is all going to be part of sensation, sensory, all working together. The keratinocyte is located here. See that there's a nucleus present, and then from here up, there's no nucleus, right? Those are considered to be dead keratinocytes. And when they're dead, they're going to be filled with keratin. And it's essentially just filled with keratin, nothing more. Those organelles, everything are going to be kind of left alone. As we're seeing this, this is the most superficial portion, the outer portion. This is the deepest. These, this particular epidermis is going to have different layers. And the layers that we have, we actually use the word stratum. So every time you hear the word stratum, this is going to account for the word layer. So we have the stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, stratum basale. We'll go over each layer and what we see for each one. What I missed over here is that melanocyte. Notice that the melanocyte is closer towards the bottom. And as it's closer towards the bottom, it's going to be releasing the melanin granules up toward that skin. So keratinocytes throughout, Langerhans kind of in the middle, those sensory towards the bottom, same thing with the melanocytes. This down here would be then our dermis, which is that connective tissue. If we were looking at this kind of like we were looking at underneath the microscope, this area right here would be like the basement membrane, and this would be the apical end. All right, let's start with keratinocytes. They're going to produce keratin. That keratin is a fibrous protein that gives protection. Okay. Now, what happens is these keratinocytes, the ones that are closer to the bottom, are going to go through mitosis. And I'm going to go over for a second back to the, oops. Let me go back for a second and point you out right over here. And you're seeing the cells go through mitosis. Those cells go through mitosis, and the new cell gets pushed over here. And then all the other cells, the old cells, get pushed up. So imagine like you had a book on the table, and instead of stacking books on top of the old book, what you did was you started stacking the books underneath it. And as you started stacking those books underneath, so I have my book here, I'm going to take the next book, instead of stacking it like this, what I'm actually going to do is go underneath. So when I stack underneath, what ends up happening is this book goes up and the new book gets stacked underneath it. And the reason why that's important is because the old book or the old layer keeps moving up. And as it keeps moving up, the new stays on the bottom, and eventually we will shed off the old skin. Once it gets to the skin surface, they are going to be dead and scale-like. And remember, this is where they're super filled with keratin. Okay. So every 25 to 45 days, that's going to be an interesting little fun fact. Every 25 to 45 days, we have a totally new epidermis, because this concept is going to happen and keep going and keep going and keep going. With melanocytes, on the other hand, are going to release a pigment called melanin. Now, melanin's found on the deepest layer, the epidermis, and this is going to go, and the melanin, when it gets released, it goes around the membrane. Okay, so it goes around the membrane uh, of these uh, of the cell itself. So what ends up happening is it's going to go to the superficial side of the nucleus, and what happens is you'll have a cell, you'll have your nucleus, and you have this going around the membrane of the nucleus. Now, what ends up happening is this melanin what it is, it's protection. It's protecting from UV radiation, and it gives almost like a shield around the nucleus. Because when you look at the cell itself is good, but the nucleus has all the genetic information, all the DNA. So if it's having all the DNA, we're saying, oh, well, I can't just get rid of, or I can't just, not have my DNA there. I need to make sure that I have this DNA protected. So to have this DNA protected, we're just going to see our um, melanin kind of go around. Oh, this is make this smaller. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. Okay. All right. So with this melanin going around the nucleus, it makes sense that our body actually is going to help us produce more of this melanin based off of our time in the sun. So if we go to the sun and we're hanging out at the beach, what ends up happening is the body goes, oh, are we going to be doing this a lot? If we're going to be doing this a lot, what I need to do is start building up my melanin. If I start building up my melanin, next time we go to the beach and the sun is hitting us, I'm protecting myself from these UV rays. And that's why we get tan. We get tan because we go and start building up the melanin based off of our exposure to the sun. It's almost a negative feedback loop that comes into play. Then we have our dendritic cells. Dendritic cells, essentially what we're seeing with this, these are going to come from bone marrow and they go to the epidermis. The Langerhans cells, named after the German anatomist who found it out, is going to help us with our immune response. So remember, I told you these are the guys that are going to go and um, essentially go and eat whatever foreign particles that's not supposed to be there. That's what this Langerhans cells does. Now, these are going to go and go around these keratinocytes. You see them, kind of be the police of the layers. And then we said tactile. Think the word tactile like feeling, right? So tactile, or also known as Merkel cells, those are going to be there for feeling, for sensory. So when I'm saying sensory, think like touch, okay? Because we're going to deal with kind of like a soft touch or do a deep pressure, but tactile refers to touch. So it's sensory in the fact that we're going to be dealing with that and looking at our there we go. Looking at it for our touch. Okay, so these are the different layers. Remember, I talked to you, said the word stratum, right? Layers, we could say the word stratum. So the way that we're going to remember this is the saying, come, let's get sunburnt. Come, let's get sunburnt. If you can remember, come, let's get sunburnt, you're going to remember from the most superficial to the deep the first letter of each of these stratums. Come, let's get sun burnt. This is the most superficial, meaning the outside. Stratum corneum. Then we move to the stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum. And then we get to the most deep, would be the stratum basale. I also look at this word basale, it kind of looks like the base, right? Like the base of something. So I use that to help me remember the base. And then with each one of them, there's going to have these specific kinds of cells that we're going to see in each of them. So when we look at this kind of thing, the reason why it said each one's going to have a different type, because come let's get sunburnt is one type, and then it's come get sunburnt. So this is 5 layers, and this is 4 layers. What happens is we have thick and thin skin. Thin skin is going to be the come get sunburnt. This is the 4 layers. What happens with thick skin? This is the come let's get sunburnt. This is when we have our 5 layers, hence the whole thick thing. This is found in the soles of your feet, the fingertips, the palms of your hands. Essentially, the real areas that you're going to see like a lot of like abrasion or like wear and tear, we're constantly walking on our feet, constantly using our hands. So these are the things that we're going to see thick skin. Pretty much everywhere else is going to be thin skin. And it's thin because of the number of layers. So the one that's actually going to be different is that the stratum lucidum is not there, right? We've just taken away one extra layer. So stratum corneum, come get sun burnt. There's 4 layers. We know that this would be considered thin skin. If there was another layer of stratum, the stratum lucidum, then we would say it's thick skin. So let's talk each layer. We'll start off with the basal layer or strata basale. This is the deepest of all the layers. What ends up happening is if you remember when looking at like stratified squamous epithelial tissue, it kind of looked like it had this like coastline. It looked like there was like this purple spot right over here before we got to um the actual tissue. Well, this spot right here that we're dealing with, so imagine all these cells are on top of each other. This area right here with these cells that are going to be the most regenerative, those are going to be part of the stratum basale. They are directly connected to where the connective tissue would be. So this particular layer is also known as the stratum germinativum, because if you think germinate, means to grow. So this is the growing layer. This is going to be where the new keratinocyte gets pushed up. Well, I guess it gets laid down, and then all the old one gets pushed up and pushed away. So the stratum basale, this layer right on the bottom before you get to the connective tissue. Next, we have the stratum spinosum. And the thing that you're going to see that comes out of there is spine. Okay. And that's because there are going to be these intermediate filaments and they attach onto desmosomes. And since it looks like these intermediate filaments are coming out, this is going to have these little spines or prickle cells. So we call it the stratum spinosum because it's the spiny layer. Now, here's a little transition idea. If there are spines, like in this stratum spinosum, they don't exist in living cells. So the cells start to shrink down, and as they shrink, these spines kind of pass through. Now, this is when we're starting to see our transition from our newly created cells to the dying off. The stratum granulosum, think like the granule layer. And the reason why is because in this portion, this is going to have 4 to 6 cell layer deep. This is where we're going to have a drastic appearance change of these cells. And what happens is we have a process called keratinization. And essentially, think about that as like filling up your backpack with different textbooks and the backpack's getting bigger. We're doing that same thing. So, what we're doing is filling up those cells with keratin. As you fill it up with keratin, it creates that bigger structure. In this, we have flat cells. And what happens is the nuclei and the organelles start to disintegrate. Once they disappear, those cells are dead, completely dead. So that you're starting to see a big transition area here. The stratum lucidum. With this area, this is this area right over here. What we're looking at, this is the stratum corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, basale. With the stratum lucidum, this is only found in thick skin and it's translucent, hence the whole lucidum part. This is about 2 or 3 flat dead cells layers. And then finally, in the stratum corneum, we call it the horny layer. Calm down. We're saying horny because it looks like horns. Okay, what happens is the cells on the outside accumulate, and when they're kind of coming off, they wrap off like that. So they're about to leave, about to shed, and it creates this like kind of pointy look. So they call it the horny layer. This is about 3/4 of that epidermal thickness. We have this keratin kind of being our the thing that's making those keratinocytes come off, killed off our cells, and it's an overcoat. This is, if you think about your skin as a protective barrier on the outside, it's almost like a force field. We have this force field on the outside, and it keeps us relatively insensitive. The key word there is relative, not 100%, but relatively insensitive to biological, chemical, and physical assaults. You get something that's biological spilled on you or chemical spilled on you, it's not going directly into your heart and then you're done. There is this kind of, I would say, a need for your body to be particular. Your body doesn't just want any, because even if it's water, we don't want just any kind of water to pass through. That's why the outside of your skin is actually waterproof. Um, and we'll kind of talk about that. But the thing is that nothing wants to just pass through the skin by itself, especially anything that's like living or an acid or a base, or if you get hit. I mean, we don't want that to go directly and damage other types of organs. So, while walking barefoot in the barn, Jeremy actually stepped on a rusty nail that penetrated the epidermis on the sole of his foot. Name the layers that the nail pierced through from the superficial skin surface to the junction of the dermis. I shouldn't have to tell you that. Shouldn't have to tell you superficial to the dermis. I'm just saying a nail went in. What is going to be the layers? What you should be thinking, since we're talking about stepping on the rusty nail, that's on the sole of the foot. If we're looking at the sole of the foot, that is actually going to have thick skin. If it's thick skin, that means there should be 5 layers. So your answer is come, let's get sunburnt. Stratum corneum, then stratum lucidum, then stratum granulosum, then stratum spinosum, stratum basale. So the stratum basale is also known as the stratum germinativum, a name referred to its major function. What's that function? Division, growth. It's going to be the big thing. And given that epithelial tissue in general is avascular, which layer would you expect to have the best nourished cells? Well, that's going to be the youngest. So that would be our stratum basale. All right, now go into the dermis. The dermis is the second major skin area. It's a strong, flexible connective tissue. Glue, cough, cough. Remember, areolar connective tissue. Now, it's not the only tissue that's there, but that's like a little key to it. Uh, Fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, white blood cells. That's all kind of foreshadowing to areolar connective tissue. Semifluid matrix. Also, this is going to be rich in supply of nerve fibers, blood vessels, and lymphatic vessels because the epidermis, being made up of epithelial tissue, is literally there's no vasculature. If you've ever cut your, like, let's say you had a paper cut on your hand or on your finger or something, and it didn't bleed, but it hurt like heck. If it didn't bleed, you didn't get past the epidermal layer. If you do get past the epidermal layer, that's when you bleed. So this is into the dermis. This is where you start bleeding. This is where the blood vessels are. We see things like hair follicles, oil and sweat glands, all that kind of stuff come out of this dermis. Remember, I said this is like the major aspect of your skin. The dermis actually has 2 layers. It's the papillary layer and the reticular layer. So papillary and reticular layer. The papillary layer, what ends up happening, anytime you hear like the word like papilla, it creates these like finger-like projections. They're not perfect every time, but they create these bumps. So the papillary layer is where those bumps are going to be. The reticular layer would essentially be underneath that. With our dermis, each layer in that dermis is going to have a little bit of a different job. So, like I told you, areolar connective tissue found in that papillary layer. Um, we have these bumps called dermal papilla. Those are going to be the bumps that are essentially on the dermis, but causing the epidermis to move. There's going to be capillary loops, free nerve endings, pain receptors, and touch receptors that are going to all be within this dermal papilla. So when you see, if I was kind of drawing out, I have like a dermal papilla that looks like this. Oops. Oh, it erases everything. Let me do that again. So it kind of goes like this. And then within each of these, that's where you'll find things like capillary loops, lymphatic ducts, and all that kind of good stuff. Those are the dermal papilla. Now, in the reticular layer, that's going to be 80% of the thickness of that dermis. So most of it is in that dermis. This is irregular dense fibrous connective tissue or dense irregular connective tissue. Okay. This is going to, instead of having a normal, I would you can not even just normal, but just like a regular kind of shape. If you remember, dense regular connective tissue had like these waves. Dense irregular makes it look like it has like it's going in every direction, and that's what makes up this reticular layer. So, in the reticular layer, we have these things called cleavage or tension lines. And what happens is that's where there's going to be any kind of separation or loose connections for that skin. Now, a lot of times we can use these cleavage lines for our at our advantage because a surgeon can actually use that to make an incision that's parallel to the lines. So instead of just randomly saying, okay, I'm just going to cut here, here, and here, we can map out these cleavage lines and say, oh, if we cut along these cleavage lines, not only is it going to be easier for us, but when we suture everything together and we try to, put everything back together, um, it's going to be easier. So you'll see this. Uh, Next, we have flexure lines. Flexure lines, what I want you to do is look at your hand. And the one that's probably, for me, one of the most interesting ones is right underneath your palm. There's two flexure lines. So that if you were to take your hand and move it so that your palm, if you're looking at your palm is facing down, you'll see in your wrist you have these bends, like these folds of skin. Those are what we call flexure lines. So over here, we have things like friction ridges. We have our flexure lines. Um, these are the cleavage lines. As you can see, like if I was going to make an incision, like one that's pretty common was like if somebody had their appendix out, you would see the scar is usually like this, and it's following that cleavage line. And the person, depending on when they got their appendix out, might have a scar that looks like that because there was staples in there. So Which layer is responsible for producing fingerprints? That's going to be our papillary layer. Um, which tissue of the hypodermis makes a good shock absorber? That's adipose. And you've just gotten a paper cut. It's very painful, but it doesn't bleed. Have you penetrated into the bus? Into the have you penetrated into the dermis? What does that mean? Or is it just the dermis? Is it just the epidermis? It's just the epidermis. If I have this layer, these layers of my skin, I have epidermis, I have dermis. If you go down and only hit there, you will not bleed. It's not until you get to the dermis where those dermal papilla have those capillary loops. Okay, skin color. When we look at skin color, it's actually, we said melanin, right? But melanin is only part of it because the thing is, melanin is the only thing that's made naturally in our skin. Keratin and hemoglobin are going to be found in different areas, but each one actually does give a different skin color. So when we look at melanin, we're thinking about our reddish yellow to brown color. And again, these are going to get produced by something called melanocytes. And this melanocyte is going to release the melanin based off of UV. And the UV itself has the sun, as we're picking up the sun, we're going to try to protect our nucleus. A very interesting aspect of it, the evolutionary aspect of melanin, is I want you to think about where your ancestors are from. And dependent on where your ancestors are from, is how dark your skin color will be. Anybody who has ancestors that are closer to the equator, they will have a darker skin color. The reason why is because you are protecting yourself from that UV. So you have a constant tan to go and protect since you're when you're closer to the equator, you're closer to the sun. The further away you are, the lighter the skin color. Freckles, moles, those are just melanin in one particular area. Um, Going in the sun has that melanin buildup. As far as an imbalance, what can happen is if we have too much of this sun, what it does is it starts damaging the skin. So if you remember, especially in the areolar connective tissue has all three protein fibers, collagenous, elastic, and reticular. The elastic fibers start to clump up. And those elastic fibers that are supposed to be meant to kind of stretch and recoil, now they're clumping up and they make this leather kind of look. You'll even see a depression in the immune system with a high exposed amount of sun. You can actually see an alteration of the DNA of the skin cells. And the question is, why would a dark skinned person get skin cancer less often than a fair skinned person? And the answer is more melanin. If you have more of that melanin, you're actually going to see more protection. All right. Next pigment, carotene. Carotene, think like carrot, right? A carrot is orange. So it's yellow to orange. is going to be found again in carrot like plant products. Carrots is a big one. Sweet potatoes, yams, that's another one that has it. This is going to go into the stratum corneum. And that's why things like palms of your hands, soles of your feet, they look a little where that stratum corneum is a little thicker. Um, they look a little bit more orange than anything else. Now, the thing about keratin is that keratin can be converted into vitamin A, and vitamin A is good for your normal vision. And that's why they say eat carrots, they're good for your eyes because of the keratin. After keratin, we have hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is going to make that pink kind of red hue of the skin. And now what happens is whenever there's an alteration in the amount of blood going to a particular area, it can make that area look really red or pink just by sending blood to that area. The more fair skinned that you are, the more you'll be able to see it. So, a typical idea is when somebody who is fair skinned is sunburnt. The reason why they're all red is because we all get this. If we get a little bit of sunburn, our red blood cells, our blood gets pushed to the area to try to fix it. Well, if you're already fair skinned, then you're going to see it a lot more. And that's why you're going to get really super red. Um, if I mean technically, if you're not red, you're not fair skinned, it's harder to see the reddening. But no matter what, we have this pigment called hemoglobin, and that hemoglobin is what's going to pick up the oxygen. That is what gives us this reddish kind of color. Um, Awesome. As far as imbalances go with the skin, our skin color can actually tell us a lot of things. One of them is redness. I was just kind of talking about that. The appropriate term would be erythema. This is a reddening of the skin. Now, the question is why? It could happen because embarrassment, fever, hypertension, inflammation, or even allergies. If you're sending a lot of blood to the area, it means something kind of went wrong, right? You're sending a lot of blood to the area, something's wrong. So let's try to fix it. Send white blood cells, send nutrients, send what we can. But when you do that, you have this reddening happen. Pallor is almost the opposite. It's blanching. It's because of fear, anger, and emotional stress. It's becoming pale. Now, that pale skin um, can be because of a couple of different things. Anemia meaning that the blood itself is almost not going to the areas that we need it to. It's almost not. The biggest thing is that it doesn't have enough of the iron to make the hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin needs to pick up the oxygen, and the oxygen needs to go to the cells, and then when it goes to the cells, it can go help make create things like ATP. You can't do that. Low blood pressure, that's another one. So we have redness and pallor. Then we have a jaundice color. The jaundice is a yellowing cast. This is an abnormal yellow color. In this case, what happens is there is a particular accumulation of something called bilirubin. Now, bilirubin is essentially going to be a byproduct of the liver working. So when the liver is not working properly, and you start seeing that you can't get rid of the bilirubin, you can't go and filter out as needed, it starts breaking down, going into the bloodstream, and staying in the bloodstream. When it stays in the bloodstream and goes around to the areas of your body, you get this kind of yellow color, and that's going to be jaundice. Another one is called bronzing, a little harder to see. This gives almost a metallic appearance. It's because of a particular disorder called Addison's disease, something that we'll get into a little bit more when we go into the endocrine system. But what we're seeing is that there's a lot of steroid hormones that are getting released. And if that happens, you also release a lot of what we call melanocyte stimulating hormone. So we have an increase of that melanin. And then we have a black and blue. So black and blue is essentially a bruise, right? What it means is that blood escaped from where it is. So blood actually got out of the container and it's off to the side, and that's what makes that black and blue. If, let's say, the blood escapes, and after it escapes, it starts to pool and clump together, you can get these little blood swellings called hematomas. That's like if you've ever like pinched your finger really bad and you see that it's like super black and blue, but it's not right towards the top. You can kind of like move the black and blue. That means there is a hematoma that was formed. All right. These are just examples. These are examples of jaundice. Interesting enough, if the person is fair skinned, it's a little easier to tell the difference between A and B. Even these two, you'd say B and A, right? But this little boy over here, he has a little bit of more melanin there. So you're actually seeing that's a little harder to see the yellow. So what you're going to do is look at the eyes. If you look at the eyes, the inside of the mouth, anywhere that's really super vascular, that's where you'll be able to tell if somebody has a little bit more of a darker skin color. With something like bronzing, you're creating these like darker structures or darker areas throughout the, well, it's random places. It's not going to be net specifically one area. Erythema is the reddening. Um, Over here, we're seeing that pallor or blanching, the pale. And here we're seeing your black and blue. So these are just good examples, picture wise, of what we were saying. So melanin and keratin are two pigments that contribute to skin color. What's the third and where is it found? Well, the third is hemoglobin. That's found in your red blood cells. Um, Remember that melanin's the only one that's really kind of produced in the body. Now, to answer this question, you might remember or might have heard of the term cyan. Cyan is actually going to be blue. So cyanosis is the bluing of the skin. And what ends up happening is this is usually if somebody is choking, like there's a lack of oxygen going in. Not that there's like carbon monoxide or anything, but I'm just saying like a lack of being able to breathe. You would have the turning of the blue. Which alteration in skin color would indicate liver disorder? Well, the one that would indicate liver disorder is jaundice. So, looking at things like the the hair root, right? What's interesting about the hair root, I'm not necessarily going to go and go through here and ask every single question off of this, but something that's interesting to see is that there's this external root sheath right here. Think of it like the outer portion. Then there's this inner. So there's this outer, this inner, and then we get to our hair itself. In the hair, we're going to see levels just like our skin, where we'll have a cuticle, a cortex, and a medulla. Whenever you see that word medulla, I want you to think middle. Okay? Medulla means middle. Cortex actually means tree bark. So you can think the outer portion. So with these three, we're going to have the medulla in the middle. We have this cortex like the tree bark. And then the cuticle is a layer. Think like the cuticle like on your fingernails, right? It's that outer layer. Now, if we were looking at like the hair root itself, this is what we call the hair papilla. This is essentially what we're thinking about the root. And the area that we're looking at right now is the hair bulb. Think if you've ever pulled out a hair and saw like that white or clear end at the end, that's the bulb. Within that, we're going to have some interesting things like this guy right here. This is a melanocyte. And if you remember what a melanocyte does, it's going to go and produce melanin, right? So it produces the melanin and it supplies the melanin with this or these particular cells with the melanin coloring the hair. And realistically, what happens with melanin for things like your hair is that depending on how much melanin there is, that's what we're going to see is our difference for the hair color. So something like darker hair color is a lot of melanin, lighter hair color less. Whites and grays are the least amount of melanin or no melanin. White hair, no melanin. These things aren't working anymore. As you get older, you start seeing that break down. We have the medulla, like we showed before, right? Middle. We have our cortex, which is going to be that kind of uh, outer, if you think like tree bark. And then we have our cuticle over here, this side and this side, right? Love it. Now, with the different types of hair and growth, what ends up happening, different shapes and sizes and everything that we can see, we're basically going to break it down into two groups, vellus and terminal. What it means to be vellus hair. Vellus hair is actually going to be a hair of children and adult females. It's a pale, fine hair. This is not like the hair that's found on your eyebrows or on your head or something like that. This is like, you've ever seen a baby and they have like the hairs on their cheeks, or even an adult female that has like hair on their cheeks. They have that I saw that weird, weird Facebook things that end up happening and Instagram ads that come in. They have that one thing that girls can do that they have like there's this like white cream or something, and it goes on those little baby hairs, and you can like see all the baby hairs and cut them off, and then I mean, if that's what you wanted to do, that's vellus hair. That's not terminal hair. Terminal hair we're talking about is darker, thicker, eyebrows, scalp, throughout the whole body. The vellus hair is going to be that fine, fine baby. We call it baby hair. Now, when we look at functions of the integumentary system, we said that number one deal was protection, right? Chemical, physical, mechanical. But there are other things that come into play. Body temperature, still protection, but regulation here. We're going to regulate our body temperature by doing different things, dilating and constricting blood vessels. If I dilate my blood vessels or constrict my blood vessels, I'm going to send blood quickly or slowly throughout the body. That way, I can actually warm up. The way that our blood, we're warm blooded, right? To kind of increase our temperature, we can send blood to an area. You probably know that's true when you've ever like sprained something. If you've ever sprained your ankle or anything, one of the big things that you'll notice is that like when fluid gets to the area, it gets really nice and big, it gets red, and it gets hot. And the reason why it gets hot is because the blood is getting pushed to that area. We can increase sweat gland secretion to cool down our body. We also do have cutaneous sensation, think touch and pain. That's what our integumentary system's there for. It all goes to some sort of, you can all kind of bring it back to the idea of protection, especially for touch and pain. If something lands, if basically a bug or anything lands on us, we don't want that to be there. We're going to kind of just shoo it off, get rid of it. We do have some metabolic functions. Synthesis of vitamin D in the dermal blood is a big thing. Think of it like this. We go to the sun. Sun is going to help us with the synthesis of vitamin D, right? So that's going to be our skin picking that up. We have a reservoir of our blood. So what happens is the blood vessels in our skin hold up about to 5% of the blood volume at any given time. Excretion is another one. We need to get rid of nitrogenous wastes. The way that we're going to do that, sweat. That is all a byproduct, or that is a byproduct of us going and having our integumentary system. So, what I like to do with this particular unit is then start going into some of our homeostatic imbalances. So, one of the homeostatic imbalances is something like cancer. Cancer is a very interesting one because the way that it works is that the cell itself is pretty much doing what it's supposed to be doing in a wrong way. So we'll have a cell that says, oh, I'm going to go through mitosis, but the cell is damaged. There's something wrong with it. It goes through mitosis really quickly, and then it causes damage. So the three types that we're going to talk about are going to be basal cell, squamous cell, and melanomas. So basal cell carcinomas, squamous cell carcinomas, and melanomas. It really depends on the origin. If their problem is a melanocyte, then it's a melanoma. If it's a squamous cell that's found in the epidermis, then it's going to be squamous cell carcinomas. If it's found on the basal cells, right, the basal epithelium of the epidermis, then we're going to see that those are going to be basal cell carcinomas. Now, each one of them has its own kind of issues that go along with it, something that we should be, aware of. So the basal cell carcinoma, the thing about this is the least malignant, but it's the most common skin cancer. The stratum basale is that cell layer that is going to be the stratum germativum, right? And they're going to proliferate, they're going to grow, they're going to divide, and they're going to start going into different areas. Now, If that stratum basale is affected, the thing that's kind of interesting about this is that this particular cancer can move up and down. A lot of times when cancers are closer to the top, they start to go towards the top more. But this one can go up and down. The thing about this particular cancer, though, it's slow growing and it often does not metastasize. When we talk about metastasizing, we're talking about moving throughout the body. It often doesn't move too far. And this is moving from the point of origin. Going up and down is one thing, but moving from the skin to like muscles or skin to like bone, things like that, that's metastasizing. This, in 99% of the cases, you can Joey Gladstone it and cut it out. You can just go ahead and cut out that particular um, basal cell carcinoma. Now we get to some fun pictures. So you're seeing here, the carcinoma is moving upwards. This is that outer look of the basal cell carcinoma. With a squamous cell carcinoma, the thing about this one is it's going to be found on like the scalp, the ears, the lower lip. This is the one that's more associated with people like who if you know anybody who's like a lifeguard or hang out in the sun a lot, these are the things, parts of the body that are constantly going to be getting hit. And we don't often think about like the ears. The ears are an interesting one because we don't often think like, oh, I'm going to put suntan lotion on my ears or my lower lip, but those are things that are sticking out. So the sun kind of hit that. The thing about the squamous cell carcinoma is that it grows rapidly and it can metastasize if it's not removed. But as long as you hit that bad boy with some radiation, remove that surgically, your output, the prognosis is good. Taking a look, this is starting from a lower point. You're seeing this squamous cell carcinoma. And finally, the one that is going to be the most dangerous. This is definitely the most dangerous because it's highly metastatic, meaning it's going to metastasize very quickly. It's resistant to chemotherapy, is your melanoma. When you have cancer of the melanocytes itself, this one is the one that's going to be the most dangerous. When we're looking at it, a melanoma, what we're going to see is that there are characteristics that we are looking for with each of these particular masses. And if you have these particular masses, you're going to follow the ABCD rule. Sometimes they'll even have an E. The A rule of the ABCD rule is asymmetry. If you're looking at a mole or a growth and it's the two sides are not matching, that is something that you want to get checked out. The B is border. If that border is actually going to be irregular, it has indentations, it has this weird kind of look to it, you're going to want to get that checked out. C is color. If the color is a brown or black, that's usually what like a mole is, right? But once you get to tan and reds and blues, those are things that you want to make sure that you go and take a look at. D, diameter. If the diameter is larger than a pencil eraser, then we're going and seeing that that will be one of the things that you want to go get checked out. These, it's about 6 millimeters. And then E is excision, cut it out. So one of the things is that you want to be able to go and do that. So with a melanoma, it's going to be treated with your excision and then some sort of immunotherapy that comes by. If that lesion is over 4 millimeters thick, the chance of survival is really poor. When you're seeing a growth and it's having this kind of blue and this red and these things that are coming in, those are cancers. Those are basically those particular cells have been kind of mutated that much. seeing things like this: irregular borders, asymmetry, bigger than a pencil eraser, colors that are reds and browns and blacks. Those are going to be keys that you would want to go and get checked out. I think the biggest problem that we have is that most people are going to say, well, I don't want to hear something bad, so I'm not going to get it checked out. And that's the worst thing that we can do. We're scared to hear about it, but the best thing for you to do is go and check things out quicker. So, what are some things that we're going to make cells become abnormal? If there's a virus can actually go ahead and alter genetic information. Heredity. Is there a susceptibility? Chemical carcinogens, radiation. These all can take a normal cell and make it abnormal. Now, the question is, we have essentially two kinds of ways that we can have it. Number one, the immune system can realize, hey, this cell's not normal, right? And will destroy that cell. The problem with cancer cells is that either the immune system breaks down or it's so fast, there's this proliferation that happens so fast that the cell, because this is your cell, makes a tissue. And a tissue of cancerous cells is called tumor. Now, when a piece of that cell breaks off and this starts moving to different areas, we call it metastasis. So, in this case, we're seeing a tumor. And this tumor has a cell that has broken off. And the interesting thing about this is that that cell can break through and pass through little fenestrations or holes found within capillaries and little cracks within the blood vessels, go and utilize the blood vessels as a highway to go and get released to a different area. And as it goes into a different area, it actually moves. So we have the different stages. So you've heard of like stage one, stage two, stage three. Well, all of that is based off of the idea of movement. Now, one of the last things that we're going to talk about is the idea of fluids. What happens if we're going to have about 15 liters of fluid, right? We have fluid outside the cell. We call that extracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid is either interstitial or plasma. Interstitial means between our tissues. Plasma is the fluid portion of the blood. So the big thing that we'll see is that we want to maintain this amount of water, this fluid that we're going to have no matter what. We have intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid, interstitial or plasma, right? So these are kind of three subpoints. What ends up happening is if we're looking at about 40 liters, 60% of the body weight, we're having about 25 liters here and about 15 to 18 in the extracellular. So one of the things that we have to concern ourselves with is maintaining the amount of fluid at all times. So when we're looking at this, we want to balance out what we're doing at either time. We can see that if there's any damage to a cell, we can lose fluid. If there's damage to the surrounding, we can lose fluid. If there's damage to vessels, we can lose fluid. One of the ways that we see damage are going to be things like burns. The biggest problem with burns is catastrophic fluid loss. That's one of the biggest issues that we start seeing. So we do have these degree of burns, first, second, and third. Well, the way that we use these degrees is based off of the layers of the skin. If only the epidermis is damaged, we call that first degree. If epidermis and upper parts of the dermis, one, two, second degree. But I will tell you this, a key to understanding a second degree burn or identifying one is blisters. A first degree burn, localized redness, swelling, pain, think like sunburn. Second degree burn, we're seeing these blisters. Third degree burn is the entire thickness of the skin. It'll go through the entire thickness of the skin and can even go down into the hypodermis. If it gets into the hypodermis, this is where we're seeing very, a lot of catastrophic fluid loss. So we take a look, epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous, first degree burn, epidermis, second degree burn into the dermis, third degree burn into that subcu layer. Some more cool pictures, first degree burns, dealing with the epidermis, second degree burns into the epidermis and upper portion of the dermis, third degree burns going into the lower portion of the dermis into the hypodermis. Third degree burns can give you sometimes this red to gray to black looking color that happens. Interesting enough, a third degree burn, when you're experiencing it, it is going to be less painful than a first degree burn initially. The reason why is because if there's a burn that bad, you're really feeling the second and first degree burns around the third degree burns more than the third degree burn itself, because you've kind of gotten through like a hot knife through butter into and through those sensory receptors. Now, in the long run, the third degree burn obviously is going to be hurting more. You may need skin grafts. You're going to have a substantial kind of pain as things are coming back into severity. With this, we're going to see, okay, there are different types of burns in different parts of our body. So, like, the question is, how do I estimate, how do I tell if something is going to be severe? So, we estimate the severity of burns by using the rule of nines. So, the rule of nines basically takes the body and breaks it down into different parts. See, it's 4.5% for the front portion of our head, but the back is also 4.5. So altogether, we're going to get this 9%. 4.5 in the front, 4.5 in the back, we get 9%. 4.5 for the front full portion of the arm, 4.5 for the back, that's 9% here. Same thing here, 4.5% here, 4.5% here. Together, it's 9%. We have the anterior trunk being 18%, posterior trunk being 18%, 36 in total. These two limbs, 18% in total. The perineum is 1%, 9% in the front, 9% in the back, making a total of 36% for front and back. So you would basically be given a patient and said, like, this is the area, like their brachial region. If I said brachial, it's only this part. Okay, you could do front and back, but it would only be that part, not the bottom part. So you basically taking 9% and doing half of that. So it's 4.5%. But the things that you have to memorize: over 25, over 10, and third degree burns on the face, hands, or feet. If over 25% of the body has second degree burns, that's considered critical. If over 10% of the body has third degree burns, that is considered critical. If there are third degree burns on the face, hands, or feet, that is considered to be critical. So over 25, over 10, and face, hands, and feet. So I will give you a question where I'll give you kind of like a situation, and I'll tell you what was altered or what was burnt or what was, injured in the case, and you're going to tell me what is the percentage and what is the severity. Is it a severe burn? Is it not? I will also give you this chart. So different types of burns that we have thermal burns, heat burns. Interesting enough, not all thermal burns have to be flames. Think vapor. Vapor is a good one that ignites, causes a flash, explosions, steam or hot liquid. Those are all ones. I've tried to use a steamer the other day, and I've put my hand behind the the item like I was doing a shirt, and like a big dummy, put my hand behind it and used the steamer, and I burnt myself. And I was like, wow, that was dumb. But you don't think like that. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, obviously steam hurts. That is considered a thermal burn. That can cause first degree, second degree, third degree burns. Electrical burns, contact with electrical current. That is going to be, dependent on the current, the voltage, everything like that. Those can also cause electrical burns. Chemical burns, that's any kind of tissue damage that comes uh, in contact when the tissue, like an acid, like a strong acid or a strong base, goes onto your skin and it starts creating a burn. It may take some time to break down, but it still can cause burns in the same fashion. And that, my friends, is what we wanted to go over for integument.